This is The Toss-Up, where an expert line panel dissects the hottest stories within the world of sports. From some of the nation's strongest college programs right here in Bloomington to the games and moments that capture the world's attention, it's all right here on The Toss-Up. A number of Indiana basketball fans are a little uneasy right now, even though the team's record is what most thought it would be at this point. So what gives? Are people being unrealistic about this team's potential? Not to me. The way they played against Marquette was a thing of beauty. Everything else since then? Not so beautiful. But is it fair to criticize and count this team out? I can't tell you how to feel, but I can tell you this. There have been an unusual amount of injuries so far at this point in the season, which is a problem in two ways. The first and most obvious is they don't have everyone on the floor during games, and some of the guys they do have aren't 100%. The second part, and perhaps just as important, is the fact that they haven't had a full participation regular practice this season with everybody. Basketball is an art, not a science. It's not about plugging guys on the court like an algebraic formula. It's about growing together and learning together in order to play together. That's what makes the final product. Count this team out if you wish, but it's November. There's still plenty of growth and opportunity out there. Hi, everybody. This is The Toss-Up, and I'm your host, Michael Dugan. Joining me on the panel this week, we have Meredith Strewing, Dan Black, and Jared Rigdon, all of IUS-TV Sports. It's been an interesting season thus far. Where does the team stand right now, Jared?
I mean, it's early, but this team is pretty shaky right now. There's a lot of moving pieces around, and I think Archie's trying to find an offense that works right now. You have guys like Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan that know their role, but there's a lot of guys that still don't know their role yet.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not a point right now where you can, if you're a fan, you should be freaking out by any means. You're 7 games into the season. You have obviously a tough loss against Duke, but it was expected for them to lose that game. The Arkansas game, you can swallow that loss because it was their first away game. Again, a young team, a lot of injuries. Arkansas, a very underrated team in the SEC, finished third in the past 2 seasons both times. Going to the NCAA tournament, obviously you look at the UC Davis game and all those other games that week, is they didn't look great even in the wins, but still it's not a time to freak out by any means. They do have a string of games coming up that are very important, but for right now, pump the brakes on a total freak out at the end of November.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of freshmen on the team. We have to remember that. It's early in the season, like you guys said. But to look at Duke and then to look at Marquette and how well we played against Marquette, it can make you a little worried, because Duke, it kind of looked like we hadn't played a basketball game ever. So it makes me a little worried, but I don't think fans should, get too worried over it.
So going off that, what were some of the main takeaways you guys had from Duke?
Turnover city. It was insane how many turnovers we had, and we can't have that, let alone against Duke. I mean, you had in the first half, you had so many turnovers that it just nothing was working for them. Nothing was going right. Shots weren't being made. There was no defense. And so turnovers was a huge thing. That's, in my opinion, what lost in the game.
To me, it was sort of watching that first half. It was very important for Indiana to get off to a very hot start, just to be able to compete with Duke. And one thing we saw for Duke was their ability to get second chance points, or at least second chance opportunities a lot of times. Because early on, they were missing shots. Like, it wasn't everything that they put up was going in, but Indiana's inability to box out, get rebounds, and give Duke more opportunities to get some second chance points or just set up their offense again, that really inhibited Indiana to get on to any sort of start early on.
Well, IU isn't the best shooting team, and I think a lot of people expected them to struggle shooting the ball, especially on the road. But when they were getting chances at the bucket, they were not going in, and you got to be able to finish the balls at the rim. Justin Smith, Al Durham, Rob Finney, and even Romeo Langford, those are shots you have to make when you get layups or when you get buckets at the rim. You got to make those because you're limiting yourself offensively if you're relying on making jump shots or Evan Fitzner shooting threes.
And to go off of that, what you also have to look at if you watch the game again was just how good Duke's defense was. They just moved in such a smooth tandem, it seemed. Anytime the ball moved, there was someone right in front of some Hoosier. There was someone there from Duke right in their face. There were so many times where previously in the season, Indiana had an opportunity to drive. Romeo Langford had an opportunity to drive to the lane pretty easily. Very rarely got that opportunity against Duke. A lot of times they tried to create an open shot, but they forced it, and it all sort of unraveled very quickly. And that to me was also a huge key for why Duke won so big, just their ability to be so strong defensively.
Yeah, Duke's pace was just so much faster than what IU is used to at all. And I think that's where IU got a wake-up call. They were hustling. IU just kind of looked lazy on the floor. They didn't go for the balls like they did for Marquette. So it was a big wake-up call.
Now, Jared, you mentioned him, so I'll go back to you first for this one. What's going on with Justin Smith? Because everything that he kind of built up and built upon last season, fans were excited to see this season, and he's been really inconsistent. So what gives?
I think it might be a little bit that he's in his own head, that he's trying to force a little bit too much because sometimes the offense isn't flowing like it probably should. And I think a lot of people were looking at him as a potential third option outside of Juwan and Romeo because he's got the NBA athleticism, he's got the vertical jump. But right now I think he's a little bit tight inside his own head, and he's not being able to finish at the basket. And every time he doesn't finish at the basket, that lowers his confidence a little bit more. And by the time we're in the second half, he's just completely out of the game. And I think we saw that at Arkansas. We saw that spurts in some of the games against like UT Arlington and UC Davis, and then Duke, he was just not there at all, and he was just pushing and throwing stuff up that he shouldn't have.
Yeah, I mean, he's not by any means a spectacular shooter. He's known for his athleticism, his dunking abilities, but he was a player coming into the season that I thought was going to make a tremendous jump. And, you know, I thought his ability to shoot was probably going to excel a little bit, just having another year under his belt, having an off season. And we haven't really seen that yet. He's still able to soar above the rim. We've seen him plenty of times this year. But other than that, he hasn't really been effective otherwise. And like you said, if when he attacks a rim, if the ball's not going in, he's going to struggle because he just doesn't really have a second option in terms of scoring. He's very Troy Williams-esque, and he relies a lot of his offensive game just based on his athleticism. Troy Williams is a bit of a better shooter, so he could sometimes, divert to that, but Justin Smith doesn't have that ability. So that's sort of, it's a mental thing, I think, right now for him. So he's just got to find a way to get back on track.
Yeah, and I think he lacks the consistency that not only he needs, but the entire team needs. And he's one of those people where, I mean, he's still young, granted, but he's ready to take on the role that he was supposed to take on, and I feel like he's not really feeling the team yet. He's not really gelling with them yet, not really taking the best types of shots, moving the ball around as much as he could be. And so I think, like you guys said, it's all in his head. He definitely needs to improve on his consistency.
And if you look at it too, when he is getting to the basket, even if though he's not finishing, he's drawing a lot of contact. But the thing is, he's not finishing his free throws. And there's a lot of guys on IU's team right now, Romeo Langford, Al Durham. There's a lot of guys not finishing in the free throws. But Justin Smith, when he's not making baskets, he's turning potential three-point plays into maybe 1 or 0-point plays, and that's really killing IU's offense right now, especially when they're not shooting the three very well.
So just how important is Rob Finney, Meredith, we'll go to you, for this team right now when they have a little bit of inconsistency with the health and play of a number of guys?
Finney is extremely important, in my opinion. Finney reminds me of Jordan Hulls from IU. And the thing I like about Finney, one of the many things, is that he's smart. He knows the game, and he plays like he has so much more experience under his belt than he actually does. And he sees the open spots, and he doesn't try to force the passes that aren't there. noticed that Duke, you know, it was kind of a touchy game with him. A lot of turnovers, more than he ever and we ever expected. But he's so smart, and he's such an asset to the team that I think if they didn't have him, we'd be in deeper trouble.
Yeah, I mean, he plays beyond his years for sure. We saw that very early on in the season, him hustling after loose balls that he may not have even really needed to do so, but to show, I guess, his teammates and to show the fans that he's really all in on this, that he needs to show to them that he was ready to hustle. You know, he adds heart to the team. He adds an edge, I think, to the team, and obviously he also has another scoring option. And he's a pretty good defender too. You know, he was one of those guys coming in that no one really knew who was going to be that starting point guard early on. And right now, it's pretty obvious that he's taken full control of that position.
And I think Rob is a guy that's really calm and collected, especially for a freshman year. I was saying he plays well beyond his years. And you saw in the early games, especially against Marquette and Chicago State and like that, is that he would go out there and do his thing. He doesn't show a lot of emotion. He's kind of like Romeo in that aspect, compared to guys like Justin and Al and Deron, who show a lot of emotion on the floor, but they also show a lot of emotion when they get frustrated. But I think when you had guys like Devontae Green and Zach McRoberts go out, you saw Rob become a little bit more hesitant, and he kind of buckled up after those first couple games. And he's not, when you don't have the depth off the bench to come in and replace him as a point guard, especially when you have to start Al Durham beside him, he kind of buckled up a little bit and didn't play as loose as he was kind of playing in the first couple games, which allowed him to be very efficient. So I think once those guys start to get healthy, you're going to see Rob become the Rob we saw at the beginning of the season, and it's going to be a very good version of Rob.
What's the most important game that this team will play in the month of December? There are a couple of Big Ten games, a couple of big non-conference games, but Jared, we'll start with you. What's the most important game in the entire month of December for this team?
I want to say Northwestern because that's the Big Ten opener, but I'm going to go ahead and say Louisville because that's a team that's going to continue to get better throughout the year. I think they have a win over Michigan State now. They play in the ACC, so they're going to pick up a bunch of big wins. But you're going to look at a team that's not quite at its potential yet in early December, but if they can get a good win over Louisville at the end of the year, that's going to look a lot better to the committee.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I look at actually Penn State next week. It's a team that Indiana struggled with the past couple seasons. They've beaten them, but they've by no means been easy wins like most people would think. It's first road game of the Big Ten season. They lost Tony Carr, which is huge. A huge loss for them. He was their, number one option. So it's going to be important for Indiana to get off the right foot. I think they win pretty handily against Northwestern this weekend, but to go 2-0 with that first one being it's a team that you've struggled against the past couple of years, that'll be huge for them. And
I'm going to agree with Jared. The Louisville game, I think, is very important. Not only is it going to be a good matchup, you have the head coach who is brand new, and Archie only has this is his second season. So it's going to be fun to watch, mainly because Romeo, that was one of his top picks. So, and it's a good matchup because, they have a young team as well, and their shooting and defense, offense capabilities are equal.
All right, well, we're going to cut the break here real quick, but coming up after the break, we're going to keep the discussion going on the next couple of months of the IU basketball season. So stick with us. Welcome back to the Toss-Up. We're talking IU men's hoops here. But before we continue, let's toss it to Ben Ladner at the media wall. Ben?
Indiana was dealt a rude awakening on Tuesday as it was trounced 90-69 by the Duke Blue Devils in a game that, frankly, IU probably had no business winning. Duke boasts what could be the top 3 picks in the 2019 NBA draft, the winningest coach in college basketball history, and a home court advantage so fierce, even Juwan Morgan said the team was rattled by the crowd. Still, this was more than a loss. It was a dismantling. Indiana turned the ball over 20 times, shot a mere 39% from the field, and, perhaps most notably, surrendered 7 Duke dunks. The 21-point margin of defeat is IU's largest since January 19th, an 85-57 loss at Michigan State last season. Now, the 5-2 Hoosiers are left to pick up the pieces. The loss may have been ugly, but it was also instructive, allowing Indiana to identify what it needs to improve in order to reach the heights of late March. Turnovers have become a theme over the last few games as IU coughed up the ball at least 14 times in each of its last 4 contests. Athletic teams like Duke and Arkansas have managed to speed up the Hoosiers and coax them into making bad decisions. By switching ball screens with their athletic, rangy personnel, the Blue Devils were able to shut off all lanes to the basket and prevent IU's ball handlers from gaining any separation from their defenders. Romeo Langford, a potential lottery pick in his own right, stumbled through a 3 of 15 shooting night. As much as anything, though, Tuesday night proved just how valuable Juwan Morgan is to this team. The senior is posting 16 points and 8 rebounds per game, but his impact stems well beyond that. He's a rock, a facilitator, a versatile defender, and a go-to scorer when IU needs him to be. Early foul trouble mitigated his impact against Duke and Arkansas, yet Indiana played both teams close when he was on the floor. The Blue Devils exposed some of Indiana's worst flaws, and the Hoosiers have no choice but to correct them. If Tuesday is to be used as a measuring stick, IU should know exactly where it stands.
Thanks, Ben. All right, guys, it's time for Make Your Case. I'm going to give you a question or a statement, and you make your case as to why you believe that is true. Meredith, I'll start with you. Who is this team's MVP? And I know the obvious answer is Juwan Morgan, so if you can, make your case for someone other than Juwan. But if Juwan is truly through and through, then by all means, go ahead.
You know, I'm going to say Al Durham, actually. Jared mentioned he is a little shaky on his free throws, but I think he has really grown as a player. I mean, you have all these flashy freshmen coming in, and he could have easily been overshadowed by him, but he stepped up. He's a very versatile player. He's aggressive, and like IU at Duke, they show no aggressiveness, and so I think Al can bring that to the team. And I just really like him. He's fun to watch too.
Yeah, I mean, I've really grown to like Evan Fitzner a lot. He went under the radar, grad transfer, went under the radar with this stellar freshman class. But that energy that he brings off the bench in terms of three-point shooting, it's just electric, because when he starts getting hot, it just brings everyone together. It adds a whole nother option for them offensively, and even defensively. He's done a pretty nice job at protecting the rim. He can even cut to the basket pretty well for his size. Sort of reminds me of a Max Bielfeldt sort of role. A little taller than him, not as thick, but taller than him. Brings veteran leadership. So I've really been drawn to his game a lot this year.
It's hard not to, I do agree with both of your picks wholeheartedly, but I think it's hard not to look at the impact that Juwan Morgan has on this ball club. When he was not on the floor early against Arkansas, going out with 2 fouls, and when he was not on the floor against Duke, IU just looked overwhelmed. Romeo was pretty much the only option, and there was a lot of times where there was no ball movement, no leadership, and they just looked all out of funk. And I think Juwan Morgan brings them together. He's had really good games against some of the non-conference opponents, some of the lesser teams like UC Davis and UT Arlington. I'm expecting him to step up, especially this week against Northwestern and Penn State. When IU goes into conference play, they need these 2 wins bad. I think there's no other way. You can't start Big Ten play 1-1 or 0-2 because it's such a deep league this year. You want to start off pretty well against these teams like Penn State and Northwestern that aren't quite at the top. So I think Juwan Morgan has been the MVP so far.
Penn State and Northwestern not quite at the top, but make your case as to why Indiana is at the top, a top 4 team in the Big Ten.
Well, I think you just look at the roster top to bottom. There's a lot of talent there. While most of them haven't played together so far, and not everyone's producing at the highest of level, there's a lot of talent there. And Archie Miller, and I'd say, is one of the top 5 to 6 coaches in the Big Ten. So when you put all that talent together, put the coaching together, and put the fact that IU has one of the best home environments in the Big Ten, they're going to put together a solid season. I think they're going to finish there in the top 4.
Yeah, I have to agree as well. I mean, Michigan and Michigan State have looked very good, but there's no reason Indiana, with the freshman class they have and just the depth and talent they have as a team, and then Archie Miller, like you said, a top 5, top 6 coach in the conference. There's no reason they shouldn't finish at that in the top 4. Right now it's just about getting healthy and getting that camaraderie together. It's very early in the season, as we said multiple times tonight. So they should be fine come January, February, when all systems are go and everyone's playing well and it's all looking like the Indiana team that I think a lot of people expect to see.
Yeah, and when they start winning and they start getting a roll, hopefully, then you're not going to be able to stop them just because the team plays so well together, moving the ball and around, not just around the perimeter, but down low. You got De'Ron Davis, you got Juwan Morgan. They can make some big plays, and they already have. And so I'm looking forward to them being in the top 4.
So now let's make a complete 180 here and tell me what's going to happen if they don't finish in the top 4. Why are they not a top 4 Big Ten team?
I think they could make so many mistakes, and they could give up so many points like they did to Duke. You just can't have that many turnovers. You can't have that many mistakes, not for a college team like IU. And so I think they could give it up if they don't play well together as a team, and they show that they're not capable of making the easy shots, the layups, the down low, everything. And so I think that's why the top 4 might be a little sketchy.
The only thing I could really see why they wouldn't finish in the top 4 is solely because they have a lot of injuries. And somehow, Juwan Morgan gets banged up, De'Ron Davis gets banged up again, and it all just goes to the wayside. But other than that, I mean, injuries and maybe some of the freshmen not developing as well as we'd like to see them come mid-January, maybe Demezie Anderson not becoming a more well-rounded player or something like that. But, that to me is the only situation where I could conceivably see them not finishing in the top 4.
I think you have to start by looking at the overall depth of the Big Ten. I think, if anything, the Big Ten ACC Challenge showed that almost every team in the Big Ten is going to be able to compete with other teams in the Big Ten. You look at Michigan and Michigan State look like the top 2 teams right now, and I'm hard-pressed after Michigan beat Villanova on the road and with an impressive home win over UNC that they're not the best team in the Big Ten. But if IU starts dropping road games or games they shouldn't lose, and they start to fall back in the standing, it's going to be hard to make ground in the Big Ten because teams 1 through 10, 1 through 11 are really, really good. And so that might, if they start to struggle a little bit here and there, different stretches in January and February, that's going to start to kill IU.
All right, it's time for the lightning round. Your answers have to be 10 seconds or less. Jared, right back to you. What's been the biggest surprise for this team this season?
Well, I think you go back to what Meredith said. Al Durham. Hey, this is a guy that started off injured pretty early in the season, first game, I believe. And I was like, after that, I wasn't sure if he would come back and actually have a role. And then he comes back and starts against Marquette and was arguably the most impressive player on the floor that night. He was diving for balls. He was finishing layups. He was shooting the ball well. So I think Al Durham carving out a pretty solid role and starting now has been a really big surprise.
For me, it's Rob Finney. I didn't expect him to come in and just be this mature as a ball handler and take over such an important position for this team. They sort of missed that after losing Yogi Ferrell a couple years ago. They needed a strong point guard back, and they got that with him, and he's just been absolutely wonderful to watch.
I'm going to say Demezie Anderson. He hasn't played that much, but I'm hoping he gets a lot more time. He came in and he really showed that he can make the points, but he's versatile. He rebounded. And I'm excited to watch him play because he works well with the team, and the freshmen have a dynamic. And I think that was most surprising to me.
He looks like he's just wired to score.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest red flag for the team so far? 10 seconds or less.
I'm taking time, but I'm going to say Evan Fitzner. He's not consistent. I'm sorry.
To me, it's just if the issue defensively rebounding is like Duke, where they're giving up a lot of second chance opportunities to their opponent, they're going to struggle throughout the year.
I think the inconsistency, there's games where they're good, there's games where they're bad, and there's games where they're in between. I think the inconsistency might kill them.
So where does that average out to? Is this team at, above, or below your expectations? Preseason expectations.
Preseason expectations, I definitely pictured them to lose Duke. I think that loss at Arkansas was a little, I thought they should have taken that game and probably could have before the season. But I think when healthy, this team is at expectations. When they're not, they're below expectations.
Yeah, that's sort of where I am at, too. We haven't really gotten to see the entire roster healthy at once. Duke, they were supposed to lose. Arkansas, probably not, but it's an okay loss. Other than that, they're probably at expectations for right now.
I gotta be the Debbie Downer. I'm sorry. They're a little below just because we've seen how good they can play. Duke, it was super sloppy and kind of disappointing.
All right, well, it's time for last word, so pick one word only to describe the IU basketball season up to this point, Jared.
Suspect.
confusing.
Potential, even though I just bashed him.
You guys just did a complete 180 right there. That's okay, though. Well, that does it for the show this week. Be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and on Facebook at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions that you may have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. We'll see you next time.